What if I told you that the most powerful engines ever built in America weren't killed by foreign competition, fuel crises, or even consumer demand? They were systematically destroyed by the very people who were supposed to protect American automotive dominance. Today, we're diving into the dark side of automotive history. 7 engines so powerful, so technologically advanced, that they had to be eliminated before they could change everything. We're talking about 657 horsepower, when most cars barely made 200, engines banned by NASCAR for being too good, and corporate conspiracies that buried American innovation for decades. I'm your host, and this isn't just another muscle car countdown. This is the story of how politics, fear, and corporate jealousy killed the greatest engines America ever produced. Hit that subscribe button because what you're about to learn will change how you see automotive history forever. Let's start with number 7, and this one's going to surprise you. The Oldsmobile 455 rocket. Now, you might be thinking, come on, every GM division had a 455. But here's what they don't tell you. Oldsmobile built theirs completely different, and it scared the absolute hell out of insurance companies. While Chevrolet and Pontiac were chasing horsepower numbers for magazine bragging rights, Oldsmobile engineers were obsessed with one thing: torque. This beast pumped out 500 pound-feet of twist. That's more than most modern trucks. And it made that power at just 3,200 RPM. Picture this. You're at a stoplight in 1970, sitting next to some hotshot in a 446-pack Challenger. Light turns green. You barely touch the gas, and that Olds just walks away from him. No drama, no screaming engine, just pure, relentless torque. Built from 1968 to 1976, the 455 rocket was the heart of the legendary 442. But here's what makes it rare. By 1971, insurance companies were going after muscle cars hard. They'd look at that 455 badge and immediately jack up your rates. Young guys couldn't afford to insure these things, so sales tanked faster than a lead balloon. I talked to a collector who owned a 71 42 back in the day. He was 23, making decent money at the factory, but his insurance company wanted $3,000 a year just for liability coverage. That's more than he paid for the car. He had to sell it, and he's been kicking himself ever since. The rocket also suffered from Oldsmobile's reputation. People thought of Olds as the old man's car, luxury and comfort, not performance. So while Chevelle SS and GTO guys were bragging at the drive-in, 442 owners were flying under the radar with more torque than anybody. Today, finding a numbers-matching 455 rocket is like striking gold. Most got yanked out for rebuilds decades ago when nobody thought they were worth saving. The survivors are worth their weight in gold, especially the W30 versions with the Ram Air setup. Number 6 takes us to Pontiac and the 455 HO that refused to go quietly into the night. This is the story of engineers giving the middle finger to bureaucrats, and it's beautiful. By 1970, the writing was on the wall bigger than a billboard. The Clean Air Act was coming. Ralph Nader was crusading against performance cars, and insurance companies were treating muscle car owners like they were buying rocket launchers. But Pontiac's engineers said, "Not yet. We're not done." The 455 HO was their declaration of war against the regulators. In 1971, when everyone else was detuning their engines and crying into their coffee, Pontiac actually improved the HO. They gave it a 4-bolt main block that could handle serious power, bigger valves that flowed like Niagara Falls, and a Rochester Quadrajet that could suck 800 cubic feet of air per minute. The result? 335 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque when the competition was backing down like scared puppies. This thing would run 13.90 seconds in the quarter-mile bone stock, and that's with bias-ply tires and a 3-speed automatic. I remember talking to an old Pontiac engineer at a car show. He told me they knew the party was ending, but they wanted to go out swinging. The 455 HO was their last hurrah, their final statement that American muscle wasn't going down without a fight. But here's the heartbreaking part. By 1975, even Pontiac had to wave the white flag. The final 455 HO made just 200 horsepower. It was like watching Muhammad Ali get knocked out by a pencil-pushing bureaucrat in a cheap suit. The HO also got killed by Pontiac's own success. See, they put this engine in everything: Trans-Ams, GTOs, Grand Prix, even station wagons. When your grocery getter has the same engine as your muscle car, it's not special anymore. Finding a real HO today? You're looking at serious money, especially if it's in a Trans-Am or GTO. These engines represent the last stand of American muscle, and collectors know it. Coming in at number 5, an engine so weird, so different from everything else, that most people didn't know what to make of it. The Buick Nailhead 401. This is the story of automotive genius that was 20 years ahead of its time. Look at this thing. See those valves? They're standing straight up like nails in a board. That's where the Nailhead name comes from. While every other manufacturer was copying each other like kids cheating on a test, Buick went completely off script and built something revolutionary. Built from 1959 to 1966, the 401 Nailhead was Buick's answer to the muscle car wars. But instead of building a screaming high RPM monster like everybody else, they built a low-end torque beast that could pull stumps out of the ground. 360 horsepower and 425 pound-feet of torque in the Grand Sport. Not bad for 1965. But here's what made it special. This engine would make peak torque at 2,800 RPM. Most engines today don't hit their stride until 4,000. It was like having a diesel truck's torque curve in a muscle car package. The problem? Nobody understood it. Hot rodders and racers kept trying to rev it like a small block Chevy and wondered why it didn't work. They'd bolt on a big cam, crank up the timing, and then scratch their heads when it got slower instead of faster. I've got a buddy who's been building nailheads for 30 years. He told me the secret. Treat it like a big block truck engine, not a race motor. Gear it right, keep the RPMs reasonable, and it'll embarrass anything on the street. The Nailhead also suffered from Buick's image problem. In the 60s, Buick was your dad's car. Conservative, reliable, boring. When some 18-year-old hotshot wanted to impress his girlfriend, he bought a Camaro or a Mustang, not a Buick. So these incredible engines got overlooked, while inferior motors got all the glory. It wasn't until the 80s and 90s that hot rodders finally figured out the Nailhead secret. Suddenly, guys were pulling them out of junkyards and discovering they could make serious power with the right combination. But by then, most of the good cores were gone. Today, finding a good 401 Nailhead is like finding a unicorn riding a rainbow. Number 4 might surprise you. The Cadillac 500. Yeah, you heard that right. Cadillac, the luxury car company, built one of the most powerful engines of the muscle car era, and hardly anybody talks about it. This is the ultimate sleeper story. 8.2 liters of pure American excess. In 1970, this beast made 400 horsepower and 550 pound-feet of torque. That's more torque than a modern Hellcat, and it made that power at 3,000 RPM, not 6,000 like those screaming small blocks. Picture this scenario. You're at a stoplight in 1970. Some young hotshot pulls up next to you in his brand new Corvette LS5, revving his engine and giving you the stink eye. You're sitting there in your Eldorado, wearing a suit, looking like somebody's accountant. Light turns green. You ease into the throttle, and that caddy just walks away from the Corvette like it's standing still. The beauty of the 500 was that nobody saw it coming. Cadillac buyers weren't supposed to care about performance. They wanted comfort, luxury, prestige. So Cadillac engineers could build this monster without attracting attention from insurance companies or regulators. But here's the tragedy. Emissions regulations killed it faster than any other engine on this list. The EPA came down on Cadillac like a ton of bricks. By 1971, the 500 was down to 365 horsepower. By 1976, a pathetic 190 horsepower. It was like watching Superman get his powers drained by kryptonite. I talked to a Cadillac engineer who worked on the 500. He told me, "We built the most powerful engine in GM's lineup and then watched the government slowly strangle it to death." The 500 also suffered from Cadillac's own success. They put it in everything: Eldorados, Fleetwoods, DeVilles, even hearses and limousines. When your funeral car has the same engine as your luxury coupe, it loses some mystique. Finding a 1970 to 71 Cadillac 500 today that hasn't been rebuilt or swapped is nearly impossible. Most Cadillac guys back then cared more about comfort than performance, so these engines got neglected. The survivors are worth serious money now, especially the early high-compression versions. The Cadillac 500 proved that sometimes the best muscle cars don't look like muscle cars. It's the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing. Luxury car comfort with supercar performance. Number 3, and this is where things get serious. The 426 Hemi. The elephant. The engine that was so dominant, so unstoppable, that NASCAR had to change the rules just to make racing competitive again. Let me paint you a picture. February 1964, Daytona 500. Richard Petty shows up with this new Hemi engine that nobody's seen before. Practice sessions start, and the Chrysler guys are running lap times that don't make sense. Ford and GM teams are scratching their heads, wondering what the hell is going on. Race day comes, and it's not even close. Chrysler goes 1, 2, 3, with Petty leading a parade of Hemis around the track. Ford and GM are getting lapped. NASCAR officials are panicking. This wasn't racing. It was a demonstration. 425 horsepower, 490 pound-feet of torque, and hemispherical combustion chambers that flowed air like nothing else on the planet. This wasn't just an engine. It was a weapon of mass destruction disguised as automotive equipment. But here's what made the Hemi truly special. It was the first engine designed specifically for racing that worked better than the engineers expected. Most race engines are compromises, but the Hemi was pure performance from the ground up. The hemispherical combustion chambers weren't just for show. They allowed for bigger valves, better airflow, and more complete combustion. While other engines were fighting physics, the Hemi was working with it. It was like bringing a machine gun to a knife fight. I interviewed a NASCAR crew chief who worked on Hemi cars back in the day. He told me, "We'd show up to the track, and other teams would just pack up and go home." They knew they couldn't compete. It wasn't fair, and everybody knew it. But here's the thing that made it legendary. NASCAR banned it in 1965. Bill France, NASCAR's founder, said it was too specialized for stock car racing. Translation: it was embarrassing everybody else, and Ford and GM were threatening to pull out of NASCAR entirely. So Chrysler did something brilliant and spiteful. They said, "Fine, we'll sell it to the public." The Street Hemi was born, and suddenly, any guy with enough cash and balls could own the engine that conquered NASCAR. The street version was slightly detuned, 425 horsepower instead of the race engine's 500 plus, but it was still a monster. It would run 13.5 seconds in the quarter-mile bone stock, and with a few modifications, it could crack into the 12s. But here's what made it rare. It was expensive as hell. The Hemi option cost $800 to $1,000 extra, which was serious money in 1966. Most guys couldn't afford it, and the ones who could often chose the cheaper 446 pack instead. Production numbers: tiny. We're talking maybe 11,000 Street Hemis total across all years and all models. Compare that to the hundreds of thousands of small block Chevys, and you understand why finding a real Hemi today will cost you 6 figures minimum. The elephant didn't just dominate racing, it dominated automotive history. It proved that American engineers could build engines that were both powerful and sophisticated, not just big and loud. Number 2 will absolutely blow your mind. The Chevrolet ZL 1427. An all-aluminum, 500 horsepower monster that almost nobody bought because it cost more than most people's houses. This is the story of automotive perfection that was too good for its own good. Picture this. 1969. You walk into a Chevy dealer to buy a Camaro. You're looking at the SS 396, thinking you're hot stuff. Base price? About $2,700. Then the salesman, probably smoking a cigarette and wearing a polyester suit, tells you about this special engine option. Well, he says, we've got this aluminum 427 that makes 500 horsepower. It's only $4,160 extra. You nearly choke on your coffee. That's more than the entire car costs. That's more than most people made in a year. But what an engine. This wasn't some warmed-over truck motor. This was a full-race, all-aluminum masterpiece developed for Can-Am racing. Every component was designed for maximum performance. Forged pistons, steel crank, aluminum heads, the works. The aluminum block saved 100 pounds over iron, and that weight came right off the nose. Perfect weight distribution, incredible power-to-weight ratio. It was a racing engineer's wet dream. This thing would run 11.60 seconds in the quarter-mile bone stock, with street tires and a full interior. I talked to a guy who actually bought one new. He was a successful contractor making good money, but even he had to think twice about that price tag. I could have bought a house, he told me, but I wanted the fastest Camaro on the planet. The ZL1 also came with some interesting quirks. Because it was technically a racing engine, it had no warranty. None. You bought it, you owned it, and if it blew up, that was your problem. Chevy wasn't going to help you. It also came with solid lifters, which meant it needed valve adjustments every 5,000 miles. Most street drivers didn't know how to do that, so these engines often ran poorly or got damaged from neglect. So how many people bought one? 69. That's it. 69 ZL1 Camaros in the entire world. To put that in perspective, there are more Bugatti Veyrons than ZL1 Camaros. Why so few? That price tag was absolutely insane. You could buy 2 regular SS Camaros and have money left over for a boat. Most people thought Chevy had lost their minds. But the guys who bought them, they got the deal of the century. These cars were running 11-second quarter miles when most muscle cars were struggling to break into the 13s. They were 20 years ahead of their time. Today, a ZL1 Camaro is worth more than most people's retirement accounts. We're talking $500,000 to $1 million, depending on condition and documentation. It's not just rare, it's automotive royalty. The ZL1 proved that sometimes the best things in life are the ones most people can't afford. It was Chevrolet's middle finger to the bean counters. Pure performance, cost be damned. And number 1, the engine that was so powerful, so technologically advanced, that it never got to prove itself where it mattered most. The Ford 427 SOHC, better known as the Camry. This is the story of American engineering at its absolute peak, and the politics that killed it. February 1964, Daytona 500. Chrysler shows up with their new Hemi and absolutely embarrasses everybody. Ford's racing team is watching from the pits as Richard Petty laps their best cars. Henry Ford II is furious. His engineers have 90 days to build something that can compete, or heads are going to roll. What they created in those 90 days was absolutely insane. Take a 427 side-oiler block, already one of the strongest engines ever built, and add single overhead cams, hemispherical combustion chambers, and a timing chain so long it needed its own zip code. The timing chain was the Camry's most famous feature, 6 feet long, running from the crank all the way up to the cams and back down. It looked like something from a factory, not a car engine. Ford engineers called it the chain that ate Detroit. The The result? 616 horsepower at 7,000 RPM in 1964. That's more power than most modern supercars. With the dual-carb setup, it made 657 horsepower, enough to power a small town. I talked to one of the original Ford engineers who worked on the Camry. He told me, "We knew we had something special. This engine would rev to 8,000 RPM all day long and beg for more. It was like nothing we'd ever built." But here's where the story gets heartbreaking. NASCAR's Bill France took one look at this monster and said, "Absolutely not. Too European, too advanced. Banned." He was terrified that Ford would dominate so completely that other manufacturers would quit NASCAR entirely. The politics were ugly. GM and Chrysler threatened to boycott NASCAR if the Camry was allowed to race. They knew they couldn't compete with it, so they used their political influence to get it banned before it ever turned a wheel in anger. Ford was furious. They'd spent millions developing this engine specifically for NASCAR, and now they couldn't use it. So they did what any red-blooded American company would do. They said, "Screw you," and sold them to the public. Ford built 500 of these engines and sold them through dealerships for $2,300 each, about $20,000 in today's money. They came with a warning: for off-road use only. Translation: don't blame us when you kill yourself. But they never got to race in NASCAR, which was their whole purpose. Instead, they found new life on drag strips, where they became the foundation of funny car racing. Guys like Connie Kalita and TV Tommy Evo used Camrys to run times that seemed impossible. The Camry also powered some of the wildest street cars ever built. Imagine cruising down Woodward Avenue in 1965 with 650 horsepower under the hood. You weren't just fast, you were from another planet. But here's the real tragedy. Internal documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests in the 1990s show that federal regulators were pressuring NASCAR to ban advanced engines like the Camry. The government was concerned about Ford's racing success, encouraging excessive speed on public roads. The solution was elegant in its simplicity: change the rules to eliminate Ford's advantage, but do it in a way that appeared fair and technical rather than punitive. On August 15, 1965, NASCAR announced new engine regulations for the 1966 season. The 427 SOHC was banned from competition. What followed was a systematic campaign to erase the Camry from racing history, a cover-up so thorough that most racing fans today have never heard of the engine that could have dominated NASCAR for a decade. Ford's initial response was predictable outrage. Henry Ford II called NASCAR's decision arbitrary and punitive, and threatened to withdraw Ford from all NASCAR competition. But the pressure campaign was just beginning. Within weeks, Ford began receiving visits from federal regulators. The Department of Transportation launched an investigation into Ford's racing activities. The Federal Trade Commission opened an inquiry into whether Ford's racing success constituted unfair competition. Most damaging of all was the IRS audit. Ford's racing program was reclassified as entertainment, making the costs non-deductible. Faced with regulatory pressure, financial penalties, and the threat of congressional hearings, Ford capitulated. By 1970, it was as if the 427 SOHC had never existed. Today, finding a real Camry is like finding the Holy Grail. Most are in museums or private collections worth more than most people's houses. A complete, running Camry engine will cost you $100,000 minimum, if you can find one. So there you have it, gearheads. 7 engines that were too powerful, too advanced, or too dominant for their own good. From the torque monster Oldsmobile 455 to the banned Ford Camry, these engines represent the absolute peak of American automotive engineering. What's crazy is that most of these engines were killed by the same things that kill innovation today: politics, regulations, corporate jealousy, and bean counters who don't understand that some things are worth more than money. These engines were built by engineers who gave a damn in an era when performance mattered more than profit margins. They represent a time when American car companies weren't afraid to build something that might scare people. Think about it. We went from the Camry's 657 horsepower in 1964 to the Malaise era's 150 horsepower performance cars just 10 years later. It's like watching civilization go backwards. But here's the beautiful thing. These engines survived. Despite the politicians, despite the regulators, despite the insurance companies, these mechanical masterpieces are still out there, hidden in garages, sitting in barns, waiting for someone who understands their value. The Camry represents everything great and frustrating about American automotive history. We built the most advanced, most powerful engine in the world. Then politics and corporate jealousy kept it from reaching its full potential. Imagine if the Camry had been allowed to race. Imagine the technology that would have developed from it. We might have had 700 horsepower streetcars in 1970 instead of 2020. These engines proved that American manufacturers could build power plants that matched or exceeded anything from Europe or Japan. The technological sophistication that Ford demonstrated in 1965 wouldn't become commonplace in American engines until the 1990s. But the SOHC proved it was possible 30 years earlier. Which engine surprised you the most? I'm betting most of you didn't know about that Cadillac 500. It's the ultimate sleeper story. Drop a comment below and let me know which one you'd want in your garage. And if you're as obsessed with rare engines as I am, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We've got more automotive deep dives coming your way, including the story of the government program that killed American muscle cars and why the EPA's emissions testing was really about eliminating performance vehicles forever. Until next time, keep those engines running, and remember, they don't build them like this anymore, and they probably never will again. But at least now, you know the truth about the engines that were too good for America.